Hello and welcome to The Charity Show, the podcast for charity insiders by charity insiders. Please rate, follow or subscribe to us on your usual podcast platform. And here's what's coming up in episode 20. We've got Steffy Bechelet from Brainkind and Hannah Williams from Women's Aid talking about an amazing collaborative project that they've been working on together, basically looking at the link between domestic abuse and brain injury. Really, really serious subject, obviously, but some incredible work that the two charities are doing together there.
This can happen to anyone, absolutely anyone. There's no one face of brain injury. There's no one face of lived experience of domestic abuse. So if you've experienced any of those things and you feel ready to and safe to, please seek that support.
From a Women's Aid perspective, success for us looks like those long-lasting impacts of domestic abuse that I was talking about are understood and addressed, and making sure survivors get the support they need when they need that. So that means that looking at things like education, housing, or in the instance of this partnership, health, and then really being able to understand and acknowledge the link between brain injury and domestic abuse.
What do you think your team would do? What do you think the charity do if an £18 million gift came your way? What do you reckon?
I think we'd have a collective moment of hysteria, to be honest. That is a transformational amount of money, isn't it?
Hello and welcome to episode 20 of The Charity Show with me, Tim Beynon, Head of Marketing Engagement at Firefighters Charity.
And me, Piers Townley, PR Manager at the Brain Tumour Charity.
So Piers, episode 20, how are you doing? How's things with you?
Yeah, all good, actually. A slight pause before we go into our big awareness month here at the Brain Tumour Charity and for the brain tumour community in the UK generally. But a slight pause. It's on a half term, so trying to get some peace and quiet, which is kind of like, that's not going to happen. But yeah, all good. How about you, Tim?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. Peace and quiet at half term just doesn't happen, does it? So anyway, you have this kind of idea that you'll get a bit of a break when you take time off, but no, it doesn't seem to happen. Anyway, never mind. It's been a good couple of weeks. We've we kicked off our first the Charity Show Bites mini episode last week, which seems to have gone down really well, which is great. So that comes every other Monday when there isn't a main show. So if you haven't caught up with it already, make sure you check out the Charity Show Bites. 10 or 15 minutes of me and Piers rambling about nonsense, basically. It's pretty much it, isn't it, Piers, really?
How dare you, Tim? Insightful third sector insights. That's what it's billed as. No, it's me and you rambling slightly.
Yeah, nonsense. There you go. Anyway, we've got a cracking show coming up this time around. We've got Steffy Bechelet from Brainkind and Hannah Williams from Women's Aid talking about an amazing collaborative project that they've been working on together, basically looking at the link between domestic abuse and brain injury. Really, really serious subject, obviously, but some incredible work that the two charities are doing together there. And this is a brilliant example of two charities working together to achieve something that they couldn't do by themselves. So cracking interview coming up, a really fascinating insight into that partnership. And Piers, I know you and I aren't exactly on the services or policy side of things. We're boring old comms guys, but have you had any experience of sort of working with another charity to do something significant?
We do collaborate on a regular basis with other brain tumour charities in the UK, Tim, but you're right, it's kind of slightly outside of the day job, but obviously being in PR, being in comms, we support any of these pushes. We're part of an APPG on brain tumours. That's an all-party parliamentary group alongside Brain Tumour Research, Brains Trust, various other charities are out there, the Tessa Jowell Foundation as well, all come together to try and drive research, across the landscape and try and drive change as a whole, because obviously speaking with one voice, that's when you're most powerful. So that's where most of our collaboration, that's where most of our energy goes with on that. How about yourself?
Yeah, we have something very similar really at Firefighters Charity. So we're part of an initiative that was launched by Prince William and when he was Duke of Cambridge, now Prince of Wales, isn't he? That's right, got to get that right. Together with the Royal Foundation, which is his charity. And he launched this partnership where he sort of brings together leaders from across the emergency services sector to basically look into how together we can sort of better support the mental well-being of emergency responders across the UK, which is fantastic. And one of the projects he set up was called Blue Light Together. And also, as well as that, he set up this Royal Foundation Senior Leaders Board, of which our Chief Executive sits on. And really great to be a part of that with other emergency services charities, and coming together, just like you said, with you guys, to do something significant. And also, vitally, someone like Prince William brings a prestige and brings a profile to the whole issue that otherwise would be hard to get. So, yeah, fantastic to be a part of that. And then when I had another charity, I was with NACRO many years ago. We worked with other charities that worked in the similar field to see if we could bring around change to the Rehabilitation of Offenders Acts back in the day. And that was a really exciting piece of work to be involved in. So collaboration is amazing. It can do great things, and it's fascinating to see, and be great to hear from other people, other charities, about how it's worked for them as well. So yeah, amazing stuff. When charities join forces, they can drive real change, sometimes in ways they never could alone. For this episode, we sat down with Steffy Bechelet, brain injury and domestic abuse researcher at Brainkind, and Hannah Williams, evaluation and learning manager at Women's Aid, to explore the power of partnership. Brainkind and Women's Aid have teamed up to investigate the often overlooked, but always devastating, link between domestic abuse and brain injury, uncovering the scale of the issue and improving support for survivors. In this first part of our conversation, we explore the collaboration itself, how it came about, the benefits of working together, and why partnerships like this between charities matter. Then, later in the show, we'll bring you part 2, when Steffy and Hannah share the lessons they've learned along the way and their advice for other charities looking to build meaningful partnerships. So, if you've ever wondered whether your charity could do more by working in partnership with others, take a listen to those who, today, are making collaboration work. Steffy and Hannah, welcome to the Charity Show. It's fantastic to see you. Lovely to welcome you onto the show today. And to start with, we're going to talk a bit about the work you guys do and how you'll be collaborating together, the two charities that you work for. So to start things off, perhaps you could each just briefly introduce yourselves and your roles at both Brainkind and Women's Aid. Steffy, perhaps first off.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you so much, Tim and Piers, for having us on this podcast. I know we've been talking about it a while. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm Steffy Bechelet. I'm the brain injury and domestic abuse researcher at Brainkind. And as you may or may not know, Brainkind is the UK's leading charity supporting people post-brain injury through neuro-rehabilitation and support, but also through research for populations that maybe aren't accessing brain injury support traditionally.
Fantastic. And Hannah, what about you, your role and Women's Aid?
Yeah, and just to echo what Steffy said, thank you so much to both of you for having us. It's really, really exciting to be here. But yeah, my name is Hannah Williams, and I am the evaluation and learning manager at Women's Aid. And then I suppose for those that aren't aware, Women's Aid is England's leading domestic abuse charity. So we're working towards women and children being safe and free from abuse.
Fantastic. Both, amazing work that both your charities do. And the reason we thought we'd get you both on today is because you've been working very closely together, collaborating on a joint project. I'm really keen to find out a bit more about that project. Also, just to sort of chat through the whole world of collaboration and the strengths and the benefits of doing so for charities and how that's worked in this. So perhaps you could just give us a little bit of a background in terms of how it came about and what the main objectives of the collaboration are.
Brilliant. Yeah. So this came about mainly through the findings of some research that Brainkind had done looking at brain injury in the context of domestic abuse. It's a report called Too Many to Count. And through this research, we found that as many as 1 in 2 survivors of domestic abuse could be living with a potential brain injury. And this really got us thinking, as a brain injury organisation, how do we connect with and extend this message to people outside our organisation, people who work in the domestic abuse sector, and thinking about that real long-term positive social impact, that piece of change that we can make. Because Brainkind, as many organisations, we love doing this research, but we don't want it to just sit on a shelf. We want it to do something. So we were quite lucky that through the research, many of the host sites for part of the research project were Women's Aid members. So we already had that connection and just started having conversations with people about what our next steps were and thinking about how can we raise awareness of brain injury in this space, and what can we learn as a brain injury organisation about the way that the domestic abuse sector supports and provides advocacy to people?
As you said, it sounds like there's a real sort of natural synergy there between your two organisations. Hannah, perhaps from Women's AIDS perspective, what do you see as the main objectives, or what are the main objectives of this collaboration?
Yeah, of course. So I suppose from our conversations with Steffy, we were able to kind of identify that there's a need to start collecting more data on the link between brain injury and domestic abuse. And we thought that On Track was a good way to do that. So On Track is Women's Aid's case management and outcomes measurement system. It's used by over 100 domestic abuse services across England. And what we were able to do is identify 4 questions that we could add to the system that would enable professionals to capture data around the potential causes of brain injury in a domestic abuse setting, but also that information would come through to us at Women's Aid and our national data set that's collected through the system. And I think that just being able to collect that information is kind of our main driver in being able to start continuing that evidence base.
Sure, it's a shocking subject, isn't it? It's something that's I'm sure you wish you didn't have to research and didn't have to collaborate on at all. It's a really shocking subject to have to work around and to talk about. For those of us who aren't experts in the field at all, tell us a little bit about what you know about that link between brain injury and domestic abuse. What do we know about it so far?
Sure, and that's a great question. It's one we get asked in a lot of different spaces, and I think people are really curious as to how that might connect with the work that they do and the people that they support. So what we know is that hits to the head, neck and face and non-fatal strangulation are incredibly common for people who experience physical violence. And what we also know is that those types of injuries are potential mechanisms for brain injury. So not every head injury will be a brain injury, but what we know is that the more cumulative these injuries are and the more severe these injuries are, the heightened increase of risk for people to experience a traumatic or a hypoxic brain injury are. So when we're thinking about people who have experienced domestic abuse, that's really quite profound, particularly for physical violence. So that is the main connection that we know that exists. And obviously this has been further reinforced in the research that we've done, the Too Many to Count report. But we're also hoping to understand in greater detail about those mechanisms and how often those are experienced by survivors of domestic abuse on a more national scale.
Hannah, just from a woman's aid perspective, how does this research align with the needs of survivors of domestic abuse?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really the validation for survivors. I think when we talk about domestic abuse is seen as a pattern of instances and behaviours. But for all of those instances, there are potentially long-lasting impacts. And it's important that long-lasting damage to physical health, like brain injury, is acknowledged and understood, and that those survivor experiences are seen. And I think that's kind of the key for us, is that awareness raising that helps survivors and practitioners of domestic abuse have that awareness of the link between domestic abuse and brain injury. And then hopefully, ultimately, that leads to survivors being able to get the support they need when they need it.
Very interesting. And at the end of the day, Hannah, I'll stay with you first. What do both organisations hope to achieve from this collaboration? What does success look like for you?
Yeah, of course. Well, we kind of see domestic abuse as a national emergency. And I suppose from a Women's Aid perspective, success for us looks like those long-lasting impacts of domestic abuse that I was talking about are understood and addressed. And really acknowledging that recovery from domestic abuse isn't just about leaving the perpetrator. It's about those long-lasting effects. And as I said previously, making sure survivors get the support they need when they need that. And in doing that, it's that whole system approach that we need to take in tackling that. So that means that looking at things like education, housing, or in the instance of this partnership, health, and then really being able to understand and acknowledge the link between brain injury and domestic abuse. I don't know what your thoughts are, Steffi.
Yeah, well, I mean, I completely echo those sentiments. And I think for us at Brainkind, we're really committed to raising awareness of brain injury in the context of domestic abuse. And working with Women's Aid has been a pivotal step for us, working with leading experts in their field who can share information, we can share expertise together. And I think for us, success of this is first and foremost gathering that massive data set and being able to really understand what those experiences are, but being able to utilize that to make change where that change is needed. So not just in the domestic abuse sector, but like Hannah was saying, thinking about that whole systems approach. Where can we all come together as charities and share that learning? Where can we use it to influence policy and legislation? And where can we use it to adapt practice where we need to?
I think in that very nicely leads on to my next question in terms of talking about the strengths of the partnership and working together. First off, do you think that either of your two organisations could have done this by yourselves? And if not, what do you what individual strengths do each of you bring, or does each organisation bring to the collaboration? Hannah, first off.
I would say absolutely not. I think one of the most valuable things about this partnership, as like Steffy was saying, is that knowledge sharing from both ends and really acknowledging the expertise that we both have individually as organisations. Like domestic abuse really is a pattern of coercive and controlling behaviours, and having experts that understand particular impacts is really invaluable. I think one of the things we've done as part of this partnership is we had a webinar on our partnership and explained it to our member services and others. And as part of that, Anne-Marie, who works at Brainkind as a clinical consultant neuropsychologist, came along and was able to answer questions. And that was like really, really invaluable to those that were there, particularly those frontline practitioners who have never had a space or an opportunity like that to ask questions that someone has so much knowledge on within like the brain injury area.
Yeah, I think for Brainkind, absolutely, I agree with Hannah. There's no way that we could have done this in isolation. That expertise from a domestic abuse organisation, and a leading one at that, really made sure that this work was a success, that it's reached all the right people in terms of that webinar, but also in terms of collecting that data. On Track is absolutely incredible, and each year gathers around 50,000 unique data sets. I can't think of another space that wouldn't require really significant funding and resource where that would be possible. So we're eternally grateful that Women's Aid said yes to that partnership, and that we've been able to start collecting that data. And, hopefully in the next few months, we will be starting to see what that year-long partnership has produced. And hopefully that will be a long-term effort from the both of us. But no way could we have done this alone, and if we had tried, it wouldn't have been nearly as successful. So a massive strength in collaborating there.
Fantastic. Tell me a little bit about the practicalities of working together. You're two separate organisations based in two separate places, two different workforces, different ways of working, different ways of handling data, different ways of technically operating and all that kind of stuff. Did you find any challenges working together? I'm interested. Obviously, there's a lot of data being handled in this in this project. How are you working together in that respect? And have there been any challenges? And how have you sort of gone about overcoming them?
Yeah, I suppose my probably the first thing that comes to mind for me is a broader challenge just around finding dedicated time and funding for projects like this. I feel like this partnership has been a wonderful success, but it was unfunded work for us. And it really did require finding time around other responsibilities. And I think, that was probably the biggest challenge that we've seen.
For Brainkind, I'd say our biggest challenge in working together probably stemmed from our own capacity and resources as a team. So as Hannah's alluded to, we've got great expertise across the team, whether it be clinical neuropsychology, whether it be policy, whether it be doing the research. And all of those members of our team have been really vital, even in the background of doing the supporting as well as leading on the webinar and having these conversations. And it's about getting all the right people in the right digital room. We've not met in a physical room, maybe in time we will, but getting all the right people in the digital room and being really mindful of really busy schedules with lots of different deadlines across both of our organisations for different projects. But it's been really great that we've also had the flexibility to, amend what we were doing, to have really honest and open conversations. And I think for us, it's been really powerful because we try and, practice our work as being trauma informed, survivor led, thinking about the impacts of our work. And that's really true, obviously, of the work at Women's Aid as well. So we have that shared understanding of how we want to approach the work. And also thinking about, the well-being of staff. Are we saying the right things? Are we getting the right message across? So our main issue, and I think it's the same for a lot of organisations initially, was around capacity and resource. And once we were able to overcome that, then it was about finding space in the diary. That was the reality.
I'm just fascinated. It's interesting you said that you haven't met in person. Obviously, you're working in a digital space. Do you think that sort of the way that technology has advanced, probably sort of post-pandemic, really, and in terms of the way we now work and the fact that we live our lives on Teams and so forth, has that made collaboration easier?
I would say so, definitely for Brainkind. I think particularly for this type of work, that isn't our expertise. We're a brain injury organisation, and we've really had to lean into a sector that we've had very little knowledge of, aside from individual team members, and being able to network digitally has been huge. We've been able to be part of meetings that we hadn't even heard of, before we had started our venture into this space. And I think being able to schedule in a Teams call, it's been a game changer. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd still love to meet Hannah and go for a cup of coffee and be able to plan work in that physical sense as well. But I think, digitally, it's really changed the game. And I think we all have so much more digital literacy because of the pandemic. We've had to adapt. We've had to use Teams in our everyday life. So definitely for Brainkind, it's been a huge part of being able to navigate this. Sure.
Do you feel the same, Hannah? Does it feel almost like there's sort of like a culture change as well, in a way, since the pandemic? Now, I remember those days where, if you wanted to meet another organisation, you try and arrange a place and a time and you'd all get around a table together, but that just doesn't seem to happen anymore. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. I think really echoing what Steffi said, it's that flexibility that this online world gives us in kind of being able to create the right spaces. It's always been great working with Steffi, but I think another example that I'm thinking of is the webinar that we did. We had over 100 people attend from not just across England, but across the world. And the time and resource it took to require that was convene that was significant, but would have been considerably more significant if we were trying to do something like that in person. It does make everything a lot easier.
It's something that we see this quite a bit, don't we, Tim? Actually, it's the pandemic and the lockdown and the new hybrid way and the digital way of working is kind of supercharging the third sector. It's supercharging, if not collaborations that are as far along the line as yours is, that discussion and that ability to talk, and share ideas and collect research. We're finding that a lot with our charity. I'm sure you use our team. So yeah, really interesting to sort of see you showcasing this collaboration. Actually, it works. It has worked. Alongside all of the effort that's gone into it, it is working. It must be such tough subject matter to work around, but what an amazing project Steffy and Hannah are working on. Part 2 coming up shortly. Before then, though, let's dive into some news. What have you got, Tim?
I've got a story I spotted this week that is one of those stories that jumps out at you because of the size of the figure that's quoted. So basically, Barnardo's, I'll get it right. Barnardo's is celebrating a historic milestone. Basically, the largest single donation in the charity's history has dropped into their pockets, which is rather amazing. So the £18 million gift, just to say that again, £18 million gift from the Catherine Martin Charitable Trust will basically fully fund the rest of Barnardo's Gap Homes programme, creating 50 homes across the UK, as well as an ongoing fund to support vital services in the north of England. What an amazing donation that is. 18, always got the number wrong, £18 million, incredible, transformative stuff. And the article I'm reading from goes on, and this article's on the Barnardo's website. You can check it out for yourself in terms of the full details. But this gift builds on Catherine Martin's extraordinary life and legacy. And I must admit, I heard of Catherine Martin before reading this story, but she sounds like she was an incredible lady. Catherine defied societal norms as a trailblazer in the 1920s. She was a successful businesswoman, a pioneering racing driver, and a key figure in shaping the iconic Aston Martin brand. As a motor racing fan, I should have known that as well. So shocking that I didn't know that, but I'm definitely going to find out a bit more if I can. Beyond her achievements in the automotive industry, she was a dedicated philanthropist with a passion for improving the lives of children and young people. So the Catherine Martin Charitable Trust has supported Barnardo's for more than 60 years, particularly in the Northeast, where generations of children and families have benefited from its funding. Over this time, Barnardo's has received an incredible amount of funding from the Trust, in excess of £7 million in the past, which equates to well over £10 million in current day figures. And the latest donation ensures that Catherine's legacy will continue to make a profound difference to children and young people for years to come. So I just wanted to read a quick quote as well from the CEO of Barnardo's, a lady called Lynn Perry. Lynn says, "This extraordinary donation from the Catherine Martin Charitable Trust is monumental for Barnardo's. We believe it's the largest single gift in the charity's history, and it's hard to express just how much of an impact that will have for so many young people." So yeah, what an amazing legacy, an amazing gift that Barnardo's has just received. What about you, Biz? Have you ever, what would the Brain Tumour Charity do? What would you do? What do you think your team would do? What do you think the charity do if an £18 million gift came your way? What do you reckon? What would happen? What would be the impact?
Oh, I think we'd have a collective moment of hysteria, to be honest. That is a transformational amount of money, isn't it? Let's be honest. I mean, that exceeds our funds raised in the last financial year by a few million. So, yeah, well, that would be just an incredible. I mean, imagine opening up that metaphorical letter and seeing that donation coming in. Yeah, truly transformational.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. That kind of links nicely to our next Bites episode next Monday, actually, because we're asking for our next, the charity show Bites, we're asking, what's the weirdest, strangest or most unexpected donation that your charity has ever received? So this could be something that's completely off the wall, could be something that's come left field and just landed through your door in an unexpected fashion. It could be an £18 million gift. It could be a tin of beans. Who knows what it could be? Something completely random. Let us know on LinkedIn or by getting in touch with the show through the links in the show notes or on any of our social channels, actually. So get in touch, let us know, and we'll read out all the best ones in next week's Bites episode. I'm sorry to take up all the time here on our news, Piers. I've got one other story that's just really interesting as well, and linked to donations, which is why I thought I'd chuck it in. It's an interesting one that I think will spark a lot of debate. So the charity, I don't know if you've seen this, the Charity Commission's chief executive has said that trustees should accept contentious or controversial donations if they are in the organisation's best interests. Speaking at the Beacon Philanthropy and Impact Forum, David Holdsworth said he hoped the Commission's recently published guidance on accepting donations would inform a, quote, receiving culture in the sector. What do you reckon to that, Piers? Charities should be open to receiving contentious or controversial donations. What do you reckon?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? I don't think this issue has come up very recently with the Brain Tumour Charity, but this must be something that goes across all sort of due diligence across the financial teams in any organisation. We have had kind of internal discussions, for example, fundraising. People wanted to put on with us fundraising boxing matches, and obviously we work for the Brain Tumour Charity, and head injuries, head impact. So that's come up as like, well, where do we stand on that? So all of these things have to be considered, don't they? A few years back, we had a large amount of cryptocurrency that wanted to be donated to us, which was a sideways thing as well. But obviously, with a lot of crypto, you've got no idea of where that has its origin. So huge dilemma, I think, and possibly going to increase as well for many organisations.
Definitely. That raises that whole sort of ethics versus financial security question, I think, for charities. So perhaps that's something we could explore a bit further on the show. I think get a couple of people in to talk about that. Is it right or wrong? Should charities be putting ethics before financial stability and sustainability? I don't know. It's an interesting debate. So let's put a pin in that and come back to that another day, Piers. What about you? What have you spotted in the news this week?
Well, I'm going to actually hijack the news slightly for the Brain Tumour Charity and for all brain tumour charities in the UK, because what's happening in March is our annual Brain Tumour Awareness Month, BTAM, as these are fondly known, and that's where all the charities end up shouting about the research, the support, the change and awareness that they're driving for everyone affected. So here at the Brain Tumour Charity, we have our big hero fundraising event, which is the Twilight Walk, taking place in London towards the end of March. Still ready for people to sign up and come walk with us. We have over 1,000 walkers trekking away on a few kilometre route through the Royal Parks and the Hyde Park rather. And it's just a wonderful day, galvanising the community. We've got our high-profile supporter, Amy Nuttall, Hollywood actress from Beetlejuice and star of Emmerdale and Downton Abbey. She's going to be joining us on that day as well, and hopefully a whole raft of other celebrities that we're going to galvanise and join together. But alongside that, during BTAM, during Brain Tumour Awareness Month, we have our annual publication coming out, The Grey Matters, which is our magazine that goes out to all subscribers. And we have other projects on the go as well, including a visit to one of our research labs where there's lots of glioblastoma, which is a very malignant, very poor prognosis brain tumour, where some of that research is going on in an Oxford lab, and a massive amount of awareness going across our social channels. So the news for us is that we're galvanising, we're gearing up for March, which ends up being an incredibly intense but emotional but awareness raising month for us as a charity and for all brain tumour charities here in the UK.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing all about it. It'd be nice to get our teeth into that as March comes around. It's amazing how quickly March is coming around as well. Also, I think it's interesting. Maybe we should look at that in terms of how other charities. There's lots of awareness weeks and months on there throughout the year, and lots of high profile events. It'd be interesting perhaps to see how other charities approach that challenge as well, in terms of how they go about galvanizing and bringing together their communities to get behind a specific week or a day or a month, and how much energy goes into that. So definitely something I think we could look at.
It's good, isn't it? And also seeing the internal pressures or the external community pressures to make this year's whatever that week, whatever that month is, bigger and better than last year's month. And everyone's trying to raise their voice, aren't they, above the parapet these days. In part 2 of our interview with Steffy and Hannah, we delve deeper into the collaboration between Brainkind and Women's Aid to find out what advice each charity would offer to others in regard to the benefits of working together. What are the pros and cons of collaboration? How can other charities follow suit? And when you're working on important but emotionally challenging work, how do you make sure your own well-being isn't impacted? So going back to the collaboration, is there any insights or findings that you want to share with us? Steffy, I'll go with you.
And that's a great question. Obviously, we've not done that data collection yet. It's not been a full year since we've had those questions added to On Track, but we can already see for Brainkind, one of the major outcomes of this partnership is around the recognition of the work in this space, and also our reputation building as a consequence of working with sector leaders like Women's Aid. So in terms of when we go out and we promote and we talk about our research, Too Many to Count, people are now saying to us, "You're the organisation that's working with Women's Aid. I've heard about that." Or "I caught that webinar and that was really, really interesting. I'd love to ask you some more questions around that." And it's also, starting those conversations around what future pieces of work could look like, how we can collaborate and share more with other sector leaders. And it's been really, really great. I think it's, even that just as a small outcome without even looking at the data is a massive bonus for us, and thinking about how we work in this area that isn't our expertise, how our voice can be important and how we can share information. So that's one of the main outcomes I would say at the moment that is a wonderful bonus.
Yeah, definitely. I think, obviously, whilst we've not seen any insights from the data yet, I think that we've mentioned before, Women's Aid is a federated organisation, and we have over 170 member services who are delivering domestic abuse services to survivors. And what we're really seeing from this partnership is a building in that awareness raising around the links between domestic abuse and brain injury. We are, like Steffy said, continually getting questions about what we've done together, wanting to see. We recorded the webinars, we're still getting requests to see the recording of the webinar, and various things like that. We are still getting, it's still, when we did the webinar, it was like August. We launched the partnership in August, and we're still getting questions now in January, which is, I think, quite a testament to how far it's gone in terms of awareness raising.
Yeah, 4 or 5 months in, that's amazing to see that reach and that awareness is still, gathering or maintaining the momentum. Would you both say that it's fair to say that the project goes beyond your organisations? Are you hoping that the work you're doing will ultimately impact, a wider charity and wider public policy? Hannah?
I'd like to think so. I think we at Women's Aid are kind of like our most important role as a second tier organisation is being able to translate the experiences of survivors and also those of frontline domestic abuse practitioners, like their experiences, into information that we can really use to influence change. And this partnership has been a really great way to start to do that. I think moving on from this, would really like to look at modelling different partnerships. Like I said before, domestic abuse particularly impacts so many different areas of life. And we like to look at tackling it with that whole system approach. So looking for other ways that we can do that with other charities would be a really great next step.
Yeah, I think organically that's already started happening, even without us deliberately going out and trying to create specific outcomes from that. I think just from the multi-agency meetings that we've sat in, cross-sector, it is changing the way people think about brain injury and domestic abuse. But even outside of our specific areas, I'm really hoping that people will listen to this podcast episode that work for charities in the third sector and think, okay, well, if they've done this collaboration, why not us? And this all started from sending some emails and just taking on a chance on having a conversation and thinking, what could we do? Not going in with a strict idea of this is what the project has to be and these are what the outcomes have to be. We were curious to learn. We were curious to have that conversation. So I think, and I hope there will be further impact. And, I would just reiterate, anyone watching or listening that works for an organisation and is considering sharing expertise or wanting information from an area that isn't their own, just make that call or send that email and see where that partnership can lead. Because Hannah, I don't know what you think, but I wouldn't have envisaged that we would have had that webinar with, I think we had hundreds of people on that call internationally as well as nationally. In our wildest dreams, I don't think we could have put that pen to paper and said that would happen. But here we are, and now there are 4 questions on track that are collecting data, approximately 50,000 data sets that we'll be able to look at to really understand these issues. And that's because we started a conversation.
With that in mind, have you sort of looked beyond your charities or heard from colleagues elsewhere? Do you feel, or do you just feel that there's a growing appetite for collaboration in the third sector at the moment?
I think there's always been an appetite. I think the real challenge is that just with the funding landscape being how it is, it makes collaboration so much harder to achieve, is finding the dedicated time and resource to be able to do that. I think platforms like this are a really good opportunity in being able to spread the word around kind of what success a partnership can look like and the impact that it can have. And hopefully it will reach others and spread ideas around funding work like this.
Do you think, just picking up on that funding point, do you think that the funders have an issue with working with, when projects perhaps are collaborative in the way that yours are? Is there something there that maybe it's not a traditional project in the sense that there's a supporting a charity funding a project and they can see how that's going? Is it more complex for them and therefore they feel it's not something for them? What do you think are those issues perhaps holding funders back from supporting more collaboration? Hannah?
I think probably the main challenge is maybe not necessarily funders, but just the amount of funding there is, and the competitive nature of funding like that. And I think one of the things I think Steffy was talking about earlier is that we had no idea that this partnership would lead in the direction that it has. And I think trying to put that in pen and paper on a funding application would have been really challenging. And I think that is potentially the challenge, is when you've got 2 organisations coming together, it is a lot more challenging to identify where you can really have a big impact and make that kind of success when you still are unsure of what outputs you want to produce.
Steffi, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. And I would add, this partnership happened really quickly over a series of, I think, 12 to 14 weeks. Hannah, I think that's about right for the timeline. From that first conversation to what can we do? What can we implement? And it all sort of fell in at the right time as well. Women's Aid were already looking at reviewing On Track and making sure they had all the questions that they wanted in there. And we just got lucky, I think, as Brainkind as to when we reached out. But I think from a funder's perspective, when something's moving at such a fast pace, and as Hannah alluded to, not having super clear outputs from that initial meeting, that can be quite tricky to pin down. But I would also echo, I think it's around that level of funding. It's not if there's funding, it's how much and how far can you make that go. Currently, we're in a climate where it's incredibly difficult and we're all having to be quite resourceful and quite resilient. So I think going back to what we were saying earlier about that digital capacity, that really lends itself to funding. We didn't have to physically get everyone in a room, fly people in, provide tea and coffee, and do all of that and pay for a space. And that made that webinar infinitely easier to share that information to such a large number of people. But I think it goes back to that level of funding. I don't think there's necessarily such an issue, well, not for us, I would say, as an organisation, about people not wanting to fund things. I think it's how big is the pot, basically, and how far can it go?
Yeah. That key phrase, that return on investment, that I often hear in meetings all the time. Just to go sideways slightly and focus your spotlight on you individually. Steffi, first, what drew you to this area of research? How does this project align with your professional career, your professional journey?
That's a great question. If you had spoken to me at 18 and said I'd be working for a brain injury organisation nearly 18 years later, I probably would have laughed. I think I peaked scientifically with GCSEs. My world of work, very much since, undergrad and master's days at uni, has always been around domestic abuse, gender, thinking about policy change, commissioning. I've worked in safe houses, done frontline work. And I think that gave me a really unique insight. When I joined Brainkind and they were thinking about doing this project, it really made me reflect a lot on my own practice in frontline work, thinking about if we'd included brain injury in all of those conversations, how different outcomes could have been for people and how we might have adapted the way that we navigated that space. So I was mainly curious when I saw that there was a brain injury and domestic abuse research project about to be undertaken. And I had read Brainkind's paper, formerly known as the Disabilities Trust. I'd read their paper looking into Drake Hall, thinking about the potential rates of brain injury for female, the female estate at H&P Drake Hall. Thinking about how the criminal justice system intersects with brain injury and experiences of trauma. And I found that wildly fascinating and was hungry for more knowledge, essentially. And just became lucky enough to get the role. I think my background sort of spoke to someone who could understand domestic abuse and sort of hit the ground running. And yeah, it's an interesting one. All sort of aspects of my professional journey seem to lead back to domestic abuse. And now I think brain injury is firmly a part of that too. So I feel incredibly lucky to have done the research, but also to be in the space where we're sharing it with people and we're thinking about making that change. And we're making that change because of partnerships such as working with Women's Aid. We're incredibly lucky and so grateful that our work is getting out there to people who need it and it's starting conversations. So I know you started off asking about me, but it always does come back to the work and the impact we can make for people's lives. And I just feel immensely lucky and grateful that I'm sat in this chair and being able to do this.
I think that's why we're all in this sector, isn't it? It always comes back to the cause, the charity, the organisation that we're working behind. So Hannah, what motivates you in your role at Women's Aid, and what excites you most about this partnership? Kind of two-pronged question there.
No, very, very good two-pronged question though. I think for me, it's it's the idea that like 1 in 4 women are going to ever experience domestic abuse at some point in their lifetime. It's incredibly common, and it really is a national emergency. And for me, coming from a background of social research, an opportunity like this to be able to, without sounding too nerdy, utilize the power of data for good is a really exciting opportunity. And On Track, our database, it's the largest database in England collecting experiences of abuse since 2016. We've got over 200,000 cases on there from survivors of domestic abuse. So it's a really, really powerful tool. And I think partnerships like this are really inspiring in being able to utilize that data in the best way possible. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part is it's just like within my role, obviously working in the domestic abuse sector, domestic abuse really does impact every aspect of life. And being able to work with Steffy and others at Brainkind, I feel like I've learned so much. I really did not know much about brain injury at all. Maybe slightly aware that there would be a link between domestic abuse and brain injury, but the Too Many to Count report really kind of hit home how common that is. You know, the 1 in 2 that have experienced domestic abuse experience and brain injury is shocking. And I think being able to see a problem like that and actively being able to do something about it, which is what this partnership is a really, really motivating thing.
It's really interesting. That's a really lovely thing to hear as well. Is the partnership seems to have supercharged both your respective roles and both your respective careers in that sector.
And I feel like we've learned so much from Women's Aid as an organisation and as an individual. You know, it's been really great, and you know, long may it continue, our partnership, and eventually over a coffee, Hannah. Eventually.
You guys are clearly doing some amazing work. But can I ask you about your own well-being, and something that perhaps we need to, you know, we don't talk about enough on this show, but you know, ultimately you guys are working with people who've been through unspeakable trauma in their lives, and of course you're both professionals, but you know, I imagine that you're hearing and dealing with and seeing, you know, horrifying details of domestic abuse on a daily basis. How do you each sort of look out for your own well-being with that in mind, so that your work doesn't impact your own lives too much? Hannah, perhaps first off.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, and something that's been really conscious for both Steffy and I during our partnership. I think kind of the vicarious trauma experienced by researchers in the violence against women and girls sectors is really well evidenced. And I think it's something that we really have considered when undertaking this work. I think, like, alongside that as well, obviously 1 in 4 women will experience domestic abuse in their lifetime, like I said. So taking both those things into account, it's really important to think about in partnerships like this, being aware of how what we're talking about might impact others within the project, and just being sensitive to that. I think we've both been very good at that, and I think like Steffy said, both organisations have quite similar values when undertaking research like this, and I think that's what's made it really easy, is that we've been able to have kind of like those open and honest discussions and hold space for each other to debrief and things like that. So it is just, I suppose, we've both been quite sensitive to that, and proactive in making sure we're looking after ourselves but also each other.
Yeah, I would agree with what Hannah said. I think it's been really important that as organisations we've been able to hold that professional space, and be really mindful of that personal impact. Because it does take a toll. It absolutely does. You know, we're all human. And I go back to what, you know, Hannah was saying about 1 in 4 women. We know it's 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6, 1 in 7 men. So anyone in the room could be impacted by both domestic abuse and brain injury. And the really interesting thing when you start to understand brain injury in the context of domestic abuse is how much of it is hidden. You know, how many of the symptoms might present as trauma-based symptoms that people might have developed some coping mechanisms for, or might not be coping. And that can impact anybody, you know, whether you're thinking about the audience that you're speaking to and sharing that information with, whether you're working directly with people with lived experience, but equally people within your own team and within your own organisation. And I think this whole partnership has really brought home for us the importance of having those policies in place to support people, to make sure that if the team are impacted, we've got a course of action we know we can take. but also just checking in with each other, making sure we've got a good balance of things. And, we would joke about it in our debriefs, but, what are you doing tonight? Anything nice? Is anyone going to do some exercise, have a glass of wine? Like, what does that relaxation and de-stress and decompression from the work look like? And it's different for everybody, but just being really mindful that anyone can be impacted by this work. And I think it even goes across to even the language that you use. So often I think when we think about domestic abuse and brain injury, or even just domestic abuse, language can feel quite othering, but being really inclusive of it could be anyone. And the likelihood is that it is someone. So reinforcing that approach of care and understanding, and just, really echoing what Hannah was saying about being so grateful that both organisations come at this from the same approach of being trauma-informed, of being able to listen and understand, and being reflective if people do need that space and if they need something, and being able to have that conversation. So really, really grateful of that. And it's a great question. Thank you for asking, because I think so often we get caught up in the doing. We don't stop and think about the impact to us as professionals, which does exist.
Yeah, it's a hugely important thing you've touched on there. That the word decompression is quite a profound one. I think across the sector, so many charities and so many individual staff, that decompression is hugely important for the kind of roles that a lot of people have, and especially your two organisations, as you've touched upon. Just lastly from me about the collaboration. So looking at it holistically, looking at it all together, is there one obstacle, or did you come across one obstacle that if you had a magic wand you could just wave and you'd get rid of that? Or has it been fairly plain sailing?
Hannah, do you want to say the word, or should I?
I can do it. I feel like this will be a shock to absolutely no one when we say funding. And I think we're not alone in our asking. So many charities have similar asks, like we talked about before. There is just a general lack of funding, and it makes it really difficult to do what we want to do when you don't have the time or the resource to be able to do it.
I would completely echo that. It's funding.
The one word, the F word, we'll call it.
The F word.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I didn't want to phrase it like that, but now that you have, yes, that's absolutely how it's done.
In our world, we know what the F word means. Okay, listen, having you both on has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. I've just got a couple of very, very sort of final questions, or sort of a couple of last questions just to throw at you. If you could give a message to our listeners, or what message would you like to share with our listeners about the importance of understanding the work that you're doing and that link between domestic abuse and brain injury, what would be the one message you'd like to share with our audience?
It's a slightly long message, but I'm happy to take this on. First and foremost, not every head injury will be a brain injury. We don't want to panic people here. But our research is showing that 1 in 2 survivors may be living with a potential brain injury, and that this is through serious blows to the head, or being deprived of oxygen, whether that's non-fatal strangulation or non-fatal suffocation, and any losses of consciousness associated with that. And I think the main message I would give to people is, if you have experienced any of those, I really hope that listening to this gives you the strength to seek appropriate medical support, mainly through your GP, but also to reach out for domestic abuse support if that is something that you've been impacted by, that you need help with, and that this can happen to anyone, absolutely anyone. There's no one face of brain injury. There's no one face of lived experience of domestic abuse. So if you've experienced any of those things and you feel ready to and safe to, please seek that support.
Fantastic. Great message, Steffi. Thank you. And we'll make sure we put all the relevant links and signpost people to the right places in the show notes as well, so everyone's got that as a point of reference as well.
Is the report Too Many to Count, is that available readily as well, Steffi?
Yes, so Too Many to Count in its full version is available on the Brainkind website. If people would like a shorter summary, you can absolutely contact me. We have a 2-page version. So, and that we also we launched it on Women's Hour on Radio 4, and I think that link is still live. So if people prefer listening to content as opposed to reading, which we completely understand, it is available there. So, and if there are any questions off the back of that, obviously feel free to contact us, and there's no such thing as a silly question.
Brilliant. Thank you. Again, we'll wait. Now you've said it, we'll make sure all your contact details go in the notes as well. So thank you both. Thank you both for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
In each episode of the Charity Show, as you should all know by now, we want to celebrate our sector superstars, those incredible people working, volunteering and fundraising across our sector. And you can nominate your deserving colleagues, volunteers or fundraisers for a shout out. Just email us at thecharityshowpod@gmail.com or get in touch through the links in the show notes. You can even send us a voice message that we would happily play out in the next episode. So, Piers, who's your superstar or superstars this week?
This week, Tim, I just want to highlight an incredible young lady called Alexandria Crystal. And she was 14 before she was finally identified as dyslexic. Throughout her education, she hadn't been presented as a typical dyslexic, but with her younger sibling, who was identified at the age of just 7 years old, Alexandria realised that the benefits of early identification are a necessity, not something to be left to chance. And last year, Alexandria was awarded the British Dyslexia Association's Outstanding Young Person of the Year. Disappointed that attempts to pass the neurodivergent conditions, screening and teacher training bill, faltered due to lack of parliamentary time and ensure whether new members of parliament would make neurodivergence provision, Alexandria filed a petition that encompasses the spirit of the previous bill. Now, the Educational Policy Institute has recently reported that SEND provision is inconsistent, requiring a major shift to stop what they describe as a postcode lottery. The EPI, the Educational Policy Institute, has also highlighted the need for increased teacher training in SEND provision and child development. Alexandria, as the face and the push of this bill, she said that they need 100,000 signatures to make the government listen. So please support, sign and share this petition. We'll put all the links in the show notes of each episode. And on a personal level, Alexandria last year was the youngest ever finalist in the 70-year history of the Miss England competition. She was awarded the title Miss Inspiration for her dyslexia campaigning and charitable support. In addition, she walked catwalk events during the London and Paris Fashion Weeks, won an award at the Top Model London competition, and was a regional North America and Europe finalist in the World Monologue Games. So many, many strings to Alexandria's bow, but championing the dyslexia and championing the British Dyslexia Association. She's just an incredible young lady. So massive shout out to you, Alexandria. And obviously we'll put links into your petition and we'll see if we can galvanise support for this vital piece of legislation.
I've got an amazing and inspirational young person to mention this week as well, Piers. So this is a young lady called Faye from Liverpool who spent 3 months in hospital undergoing cancer treatment. And she says she's amazed to have been chosen to front an all-new marketing campaign for Cancer Research UK. Doctors found a tumour the size of a melon after Faye from Liverpool was taken ill at school. She had a 10-hour operation at Alder Hay Children's Hospital and underwent 18 months of treatment. It must have been incredibly tough for her. The 7-year-old, whose recovery is still being monitored, is now pictured on Cancer Research UK's posters in more than 500 of their charity shops. They're fantastic images of her smiling on her hospital bed and on her first day back at school. And they were used after she took part in the charity's clinical trials, which aim to reduce damage to surrounding organs. On discovering she had been depicted on the poster, Faye told BBC Radio Merseyside, "I felt so amazed to see it, I just could not believe my eyes. Going through cancer is quite hard to go through." And Faye's mother, Bex, also said, "It was just so nice to have the opportunity to turn something that's been a bit negative and a bit rubbish into something that's actually quite exciting. Everybody's proud of their children when they see them do well, but to do well whilst overcoming the odds really is particularly something that really makes you feel that she is special." And Faye, you certainly are special, and fantastic that you're the front of this amazing marketing campaign for Cancer Research UK, and deservedly so. So congratulations to you, and next time I'm in a Cancer Research UK charity shop, I'm going to keep an eye out. See if I can see your pictures. Amazing. Well done, Faye.
So that's a wrap for episode 20. Huge thanks to Steffy and Hannah for sharing their incredible joined-up work, which will undoubtedly help to improve the lives of those impacted by domestic abuse and brain injury. And we've got plenty more lined up over the next few episodes in the main show and on the charity show Bites. Tim?
Yep, absolutely right, Piers. In a fortnight's time, we're going to be talking to Zoe Conn from Julian House. about the power of celebrity and how your personal contacts book could be the secret to a big name ambassador. And as we mentioned earlier, Piers and I will be back for another The Charity Show Bites next Monday, when we want to hear your stories of the strange, left field, out of nowhere donations that have dropped into your charity's laps over the years. So get thinking and get in touch via the comments on LinkedIn and on our other social channels, or through the links in the show notes.
And don't forget, you can be part of our main shows too. Whatever your role in the third sector, just send us your voice messages or get in touch through any of the links in the show notes to share your stories and tell us what you'd like us to cover.
And of course, we also want to know who your superstar fundraisers, volunteers or colleagues are too. So again, head to the show notes and share their brilliance with the rest of us.
In the meantime, please follow or subscribe to us on your usual podcast platform and leave us a 5-star review, both of which will help others to find the show.
So that's it for episode 20. Thanks for listening, take care, and we'll see you soon.